This is the new quantum era, and I'm your host, Sebastian Hassinger. Before we get into this episode, there's an upcoming event I want to flag for listeners. The Unitary Foundation has, for years now, been doing the vital work of building and nurturing an open source community in quantum, making sure this new field has the kind of infrastructure that is vital to the health of a tech market. One of the things they run is Unitary Hack, an annual event where bounties are placed on open issues in quantum open source projects. If you're a developer curious about quantum, and you've been looking for a meaningful way in, a way to make connections, learn the stack, and actually ship something, this is genuinely one of the best on-ramps that exists. I'll give you a concrete example. Way back in episode 19, Kevin and I interviewed Misty Wall on this show. She's an electrical engineer who worked at ASML and was curious about quantum, even though she didn't have much of a background in it, nor in software development. She said she pitched into a Unitary Hack to close some bugs in MITIC, which is the error mitigation framework that Unitary Foundation supports. And she's now a lead author on quantum error mitigation research papers on the archive. That trajectory is not a fluke. That's exactly what Unitary Foundation intends for the event. Registration is open now, and it starts on June 3rd. Go to unitaryhack.dev and check it out. Full disclosure, I'm a fellow with Unitary Foundation, so I have skin in the game here, but I'd be plugging this either way. It's a great event. And actually, this year, they've increased the number of in-person events as well. So there may be something going on in person near you that you could participate in, which would be super fun. Okay. My guest today is Sabrina Maniscalco, CEO and co-founder of Algorithmiq, and someone whose career arc tracks the entire modern quantum software story in a way that very few people do. Sabrina did her PhD in open quantum systems, the physics of how noise and the environment shape what quantum devices can actually do, and spent more than 2 decades in academia across Italy, Bulgaria, South Africa, Finland, and Scotland, eventually leading the theoretical physics laboratory in Turku University before moving to the University of Helsinki. If you've been around the IBM quantum world long enough, you may also remember her and her team from the very first Qiskit Camp in Vermont, where she showed up as the only professor in a room full of brilliant younger researchers, 3 of whom would, a few years later, co-found Algorithmiq with her. The reason I wanted to have her on now is that she's just had a remarkable few weeks. In April, Algorithmiq became the sole winner of the $2 million Wellcome Leap Q4Bio prize, beating teams from Harvard, Oxford, Stanford, and others for a quantum classical workflow that simulates a real cancer drug, a photosensitizer that is currently in phase 2 clinical trials. A few weeks later, the company closed an 18 million euro round and announced it was moving its global headquarters from Helsinki to Milan. Around the same time, its Tensor Network Error Mitigation function, TEM, went into IBM's Qiskit functions catalog, which means competitors can use it too. That's a lot of news, but the part I find genuinely interesting isn't the press cycle, it's the underlying claim. Algorithmiq is one of the more visible companies arguing that the path to quantum advantage runs through the software layer, through error mitigation, smarter measurements, hybrid workflows, and methods like quantum-boosted DMRG that come with built-in benchmarks against the best classical techniques. That's a contested position. There are very serious chemists and physicists who think that near-term hardware just isn't ready, that fault tolerance is the only game worth playing, and that everything else is benchmarking theater. So in this conversation, we get into the actual science behind the Q4Bio workflow, the trade-offs between qubit count and fidelity on different platforms, why sampling rate is a bigger deal for chemistry than people realize, and how Sabrina thinks about the bridge between today's noisy hardware and a fault-tolerant future where the same pipelines still apply. We also talk about what it means to run a quantum software company that started in Finland's research ecosystem and is now scaling commercially out of Milan. Before we get into it, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Outshift, Cisco's incubation engine. Computational demand is outpacing what classical systems can deliver, in drug discovery, materials, finance, everywhere. Outshift's bet is that the answer isn't a single quantum machine, but a scalable quantum network. Distributed devices connected through open standards and a vendor-agnostic architecture, working as one resource. Learn more about the Cisco Universal Quantum Switch at outshift.com. Here's my conversation with Sabrina Maniscalco. Sabrina, hello. Thank you very much for joining me. I would love to get a bit of an introduction because I think you've got a very unique background, even for people within quantum. So why don't we start with that?
Hi, Sebastian, and really nice to be here. And I'll tell you a bit more about all my history, okay, at least in quantum. So I started my career in Sicily, in Italy, first of all as a PhD student, a master and PhD student. But then after that, I started to work in quantum. I always worked in quantum technologies in academia before founding Algorithmiq, and in places that are maybe unusual because I moved first to Bulgaria, Sofia, then to South Africa. I was working in Durban, then again to Bulgaria, then I arrived to Finland. Then I got my first professorship in Edinburgh, and then back to Finland, where I lived for many, many years. And now, as we are speaking, I'm in Milan because I moved to Italy after 22 years abroad. That is really quite something. Yes. And I'm
Did
quite
Italy
excited.
welcome you back as a conquering hero?
Yeah, I think so.
Good.
And I'm extremely happy to be there. So
That's great.
As I said, I worked a lot on a research field when I was really in university, in academia, that is technically known as open quantum system. This is basically a field where you study how the effects of noise, of different types of noise, alter the behavior of quantum systems, also complex quantum systems like a quantum computer could be, but it could be also another type of technologies. They are important for quantum communication, for quantum sensing. So that was really the background of my research. And then what happened is that when I became a professor, I started to have an incredible group. This was in Finland. And I started to have the very first interaction with the first quantum computers that at that time IBM put on the cloud. And now they were just celebrating this 10 years anniversary. And I remember that the very first Qiskit Camp, I think it's where we met the first time.
Shortly after. I wasn't actually, this is the Qiskit Camp in Europe, I think. Yeah. I think with the first one you were at was, or you and your group were at, was the European Qiskit Camp, right?
No, I was in Vermont.
Oh,
the very first one.
You were in Vermont. Okay.
One.
So we probably did meet at TJ Watson on the way to Vermont.
Exactly. Yeah. It was in Vermont, and
in the barn.
It was in the barn, exactly. And there was me and what then were the next three co-founders. So all the co-founders of Algorithmiq, our small team, they were at that time researchers in my group. And I remember it was really fun. I remember the disco. I remember all the fun we had. But also I remember that I was probably the only professor. I mean, it was weird. There were a lot of super nice, young, very brilliant students, and I was challenging myself and saying, "Okay, let's see what we can do." But it was really nice because you see, in this way, we learned very early what we thought were, the key points. What I say, the bottlenecks actually of quantum computers. What you need really to worry about if you want to implement at scale computation. So that is a little bit. And then in 2020, we founded Algorithmiq with Guillermo Garcia Perez, Matteo Rossi, and Boris Sokolov that were in the same hackathon. So it was really exciting. Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I mean, you said your studies were in open quantum systems, so the
Mhm.
open part is open to the environment, right? It's
Yes,
interacting with. Yes. Okay.
exactly.
So
That's correct.
that's interesting contextual preparation for
Yes,
NISQ machines because
absolutely.
their main sort of handicap is that they're too open to the environment, right? Compared to a fault tolerant quantum computer, they're noisy, they're prone to decoherence, they're prone to noisy results. So is that sort of that mentality of like you have to deal with the shortcomings of the hardware? Is that sort of baked into the algorithmic approach to quantum software?
Yes, definitely it
Yeah,
is. And our, let's say, background clearly helped us. But it's actually quite interesting and surprising how many other very fundamental, let's say, problems, if you want, in quantum physics, like measurement problems and how to make measurements in quantum systems, actually play a key role. And I have to say that it's interesting because obviously I had having a background, I had a network of people, and the co-founders obviously were researchers in this field. But it's interesting how very often people associate the research we do, because we also do error mitigation, for example, with my background. While for me, it's very important also to say that actually, from research point of view, I started to be CEO. I mean, I'm really doing a different job. So actually, all the research is thanks to the CSO of Algorithmiq, Gia. So I mean, it's interesting how having a different perspective is really something that can be helpful both from the research side, but also certainly from the perspective of learning a new job, like being CEO. So in this sense, I really I like, and it's important to be connected with the team because I can follow what they're doing. But I've actually stopped doing research since a
right.
while now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very common. I think that's
Mm.
academic group leaders end up being more leaders than scientists in many cases, and certainly in the private sector, leadership it's very
Yeah.
engrossing. To do the job right, you can't really have it part time, right?
No, exactly, exactly. While I kept for some time an affiliation at the University of Helsinki as a professor, now I actually completely I resigned, so I'm not even a
Right.
professor anymore.
That's a very big shift. So,
Yeah.
so error mitigation has been a big part of what Algorithmic
Hmm.
has been working on. Tensor error mitigation, for example.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I mean, is that? Do you see that as Algorithmic's product, or is that sort of an enabling technology for what the product is meant to do?
Yes, it's a very good question. We have two types of products. One is an infrastructure software that is called the Digital Quantum Interface, and it's actually an interface between quantum computers and classical machines like supercomputers or even AI. Now, this digital quantum interface includes error mitigation strategies like our own Tensor Network Error Mitigation, but it also includes many other, if you want, methodologies or techniques that need to be then optimized and packaged really to be used off the shelf by clients and users, like, for example, the measurement one. And then we have a second product that is a framework for simulations of, I would say, primarily chemistry, life sciences. This is an application software. And this is, for example, where we work for simulating, for example, molecules like one of our major application has been in photodynamic therapy for cancer treatment and other similar ones. Mhm.
That's really interesting, and I mean that's the work that was involved in the recent Q4Bio win, the Wellcome
Yes.
Leap challenge. So tell me about what was involved in that project,
Yes, this was
and congratulations on the win
thank
too.
you. I mean, we were so excited about it
Yeah,
also, but it was a tremendous amount of work that, of
yeah,
course, for us was really very much aligned with what we do. So in a way, it was very natural to participate. So this was, so the project we worked on was in collaboration with the Cleveland Clinic and IBM. So what we did was to really align on a true end user need, because in this case, the medical doctor and bioengineers in Cleveland Clinic had a problem related to the lack of easy simulation of a drug. It's called a photosensitizer specifically. It's a type of drug that is used to cure certain types of cancers. And it's very interesting because it does not have strong side effects. So differently from chemotherapy or radiotherapy that are very heavy, photodynamic therapy, this photosensitizer is something that is only activated by light irradiation. So a patient ingests the drug, it's absorbed by the cells, and only in the location where the cancer is, the light allows to activate the drug and therefore to attack the tumor cells and kill them. So what is interesting is that the way in which I'm telling you, you already understand that the key process is the interaction of the molecule, the drug, and light. Because this is what activates the molecule. And this is what you need to simulate very accurately. And the corresponding dynamics then that is related to this molecular process. So this photoactivation process is inherently quantum because we are talking about interaction of molecules, so electronic states of the molecules and light. So with photons, exactly. So obviously this is there is need for using a quantum description, because very often, especially in drug discovery, but also in chemistry, approximate method, chemical methods work very well. Well, in this case, there was need to use a quantum computer. There was an end user interested in this, so it has an important applications. And you could also use, that was the main point. We developed a whole very complex framework to make it doable really on real devices now, and then link it to the progress of the hardware so that we can increase the complexity of the simulations as the hardware scale, till reaching the point of fault tolerance, of course. But the pipeline we created, which is transferable, is not just for this photosensitizer. And let me tell you, Sebastian, I'm excited to say this, but this molecule is already in phase 2 clinical trial. So it's not hydrogen, it's a real molecule. We collaborate with the inventor of the molecule, and we are working, combining also machine learning or active learning in this case to explore the space of variants. So it's a very complex case. It's not a trivial case. And the fact that we have demonstrated already on hardware up to 100 qubits on IBM devices, simulations that has scalability, so that is still, for which actually there is potential for quantum advantage. In some sense, according to certain parameters, we already see how we can outperform classical simulations, because this is really because of the method developed is a quantum boosted DMRG. DMRG is a classical technique, the most sophisticated computational technique in this case for these types of problems, and it is quantum boosted, and we see how we can outperform it on hardware. Then combining it obviously with classical supercomputing.
Is the performance increase, is it down to the fact that your simulation is more accurate than the approximate classical method, at least as a starting point, and that the accuracy carries through to a better performance on the classical side? Is it sort of like a quantum seed, if you will, for the classical?
Exactly.
Because that's a common pattern, I think, that's emerging.
Yeah, it is exactly so, because we are, as you know, especially for near-term quantum computers, you want to use them really to minimize the usage of the quantum computer, and only for what they are really, necessary. So in this case, we use them just to input the state. So we just create a circuit which is as close as possible to the ground or excited states of these molecules. And this is on everything we do. And then we sample. But because these ground and excited states contain too much entanglement or correlations in this case to be simulated classically, then we have a boost, because we can do it on a quantum computer, then we sample, but we cannot do it classically, precisely because there is a technical term for those, for the technical audience. It's called a bond dimension. Every time you have tensor network methods, which are methods like the MRG, the bond dimension quantifies really the amount of correlations. If you want also the simulability, the classical simulability, if the bond dimension is too high, you cannot simulate it classically, and you need a quantum computer, because quantum computers are really good at generating entanglement and correlations as the circuits becomes deeper and deeper.
That's almost the touchstone for any definition of quantum advantage is the degree of correlation within the system you're trying to simulate, right? I mean, that's sort of that's why
Absolutely.
that 50 qubits that are fully entangled is kind of the benchmark or the rule of thumb of roughly, right? If everything is entangled at 50 qubits, that's sort of the limit of what we're able to simulate classically, and beyond that, it's just not classically simulatable.
That's very true. What makes this method very exciting is that it's called the QBDMRG, but the interesting part is that you can have some sort of performance guarantee. So you are always sure that in the worst case, if the quantum computer is very noisy, you will always be as good as the classical corresponding method. But if the quantum computer actually is not noisy or has some noise but is still able to generate certain amount of entanglement, then you outperform the classical technique. And you have a parameter which is very, very well known, which is this bond dimension, that allows you actually to verify which is the regime in which you are. So it's a nice, very nice benchmarking technique because it's inherently compared to the classical method, which is with the emerging. So it's nice. We like it.
I'm curious, like, yeah, that's fascinating. I'm curious if you had your choice in terms of performance of this algorithm, would you rather, you said you ran it on 100 qubits
Mm.
on an IBM superconducting system, would you rather have 100 qubits with higher fidelity, lower
Mhm.
gate noise, lower error rates, or 200 qubits with the same noise characteristics as the 100? In other words, noisy but larger scale, is that more valuable, or just lowering the noise and the errors in the same scale?
That's a super, super good question. And the answer
Thank
is
you.
it depends. Obviously,
Of course.
it depends. It depends. Because,
Of
of course,
course.
as you point out, there are many other factors which are very much platform dependent. So, for example, if you think in terms of neutral atom platforms, we have amazing progress done by many, many companies, many groups on neutral atoms. And there you would have certainly much better error, let's say error rates, the fidelity is much higher. But the problem in that case is that they're much slower devices, and so therefore you cannot sample efficiently. Every time you do chemistry, if you really want to do chemistry and you want to calculate properties, you need very many samples because you have to reach high accuracy. So for doing chemistry, it's really hard to use slower devices because the number of samples is generally much lower. If you use superconducting qubits, you can do, I don't know, millions of measurements. If you use neutral atoms, you can do 1,000, 10,000. So it's a huge gap when it comes to the error associated to the simulations. Mm.
Interesting. So are there, can you foresee eventually, let's say there's slow qubits, but they're 100% fault tolerant. Would you be
Yes.
able to get the same results with fewer samples if you knew the results were accurate, or is it just inherent in the algorithm itself that it's probabilistic and therefore needs to be sampled to
um, uh,
get your data?
In general, not just the algorithm, but in general, for any measurement of properties of chemistry, independently from our algorithms, you will need to do many samples. This is just because quantum mechanics is probabilistic, so you have to calculate expectation values of observables, and therefore you have to gather statistics. That's, I mean, very, very, very basic, and it's not depending on our algorithm. It depends on all the times in which you want to measure a property through an observable. And in chemistry, this is the case because you want to calculate properties. So that is in general. But then, of course, there is yet another important part, which is related to fault-tolerant algorithms. And in this case, this important part is, which plays a key role, is how well you can generate the initial state. So, because again, we are talking about a very complex, many, many multi-qubits active spaces of these molecules. So representations, if you want, simplified the representation of the molecules. But of course, imagine that the space of possible states for 100 qubits is tremendously large. I mean, we know that it's an exponential problem. So if you start from the wrong state, or even from a state which is random, you will never, it doesn't matter if you use our algorithm or fault tolerant algorithms like phase estimation is the most common algorithm in fault tolerance for fault tolerant quantum chemistry simulation. I mean, unfortunately, you really have to very clearly move towards a state generated on the quantum computer that has a significant overlap with the state you want eventually to simulate. Now, this is yet another type of problems for which we have another part of algorithm. So you see, it's a pipeline where we have to initialize the quantum computer, then you have to create the circuit in the best possible manner. Then you have to measure, super important how you measure to reduce the errors, to use as little number of samples as possible. And then you have to post-process, not really as noise mitigation, but with DMRG. So and all of these things are important. They all have their advantage of challenges as we move to different physical implementations or platforms. So neutral atoms versus, for example, superconducting qubits, and they're all different. In a way, different parts will continue to be useful in the fault tolerant era. For example, the state initialization and the measurements, they will remain also for a fault tolerant quantum computer. But then instead, we can use quantum phase estimation instead of just sampling, for example.
I see. That's interesting. And also it occurs to me when your description of sort of testing the photosensitivity of that molecule, to what degree, I mean, it feels like with everything with quantum computing, there's some amount of the sort of the engineering problem you just described, the pipelining, how do you break the problem down in a way that's manageable by the hardware? How do you mitigate the shortcomings of the hardware? But there's also, it feels like the exploration is also revealing more and more about quantum mechanics itself. I mean,
absolutely, yes,
right. I mean that there's a generalized learning about the foundations of how the universe works when you try to tackle this type of problem.
But this is exactly, I think, for me at least, the most exciting part of this field, because it's a field that go all the way from really applications, even industrial applications. You're starting to think about all these industrial applications, all the way down to very basic quantum physics knowledge, and to what are still the open problems in quantum physics. So, of course, a lot of the research. Of course, we have a large research team. We also have software engineers and product people, but we still have a large research team, and many of them bottlenecks and type of research they do is still very fundamental. Obviously, is oriented towards innovation, so towards a product, towards a client that has a need. But it's interesting because even the researchers and those who are more even mathematical physicists, they're super excited because they can still do fundamental research.
Right. Yeah, I mean that it seems in that context that you as a scientist who's now a leader of a corporation that now has just raised more funds and has re-headquartered in Milan, you have the unique profile suited for managing that spectrum all the way from fundamental research to product development and go-to-market and all of the usual things that a tech startup has to deal with. What's sort of is there some model that you use in your mind to try to balance those two, the curiosity-driven, open-ended versus the very market-driven, engineering?
Of course. This is the big challenge because, especially at the beginning, now we are 5 years old, but especially at the beginning, we needed to, let's say, when we started to hire the R&D people, we needed to, in a way, let them understand that it's different ways of doing research, even if you have the opportunity of doing R&D. And it's incredibly interesting to see this shift, how collaborating with the more product, software engineering, but even the, more commercial people in the company, because of the culture that we have created, they started to change their mentality in a way that they really understand what is needed. And so they themselves ask questions in terms of their research, or set OKRs, or in a different manner. So they have shifted their usual way of doing research, maintaining the appeal and the interest and the excitement of curiosity-driven research, but being very mindful of moving in the direction of what is needed for the company, and for creating a product, and being useful to a client, of course. It's been a process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, it seems like, at least from observing from the outside, Algorithmiq has been very smart about picking things like the Wellcome Leap Challenge, for example, that are a real customer problem, a real world problem with value. Obviously, when you're testing a cancer drug, it's very easy to imagine what the value is, but also economic value. If you're looking more broadly than just that one drug testing scenario, is there? Do you see, as I said, you just closed a new round. You're 5 years in, as you said. Do you see a continuation of the focus on life sciences, or do you think Algorithmiq will address other verticals in the future?
That's another super interesting question, because actually what has happened are two things. The first thing is that we realize from the product, the digital quantum interface, which is more low level in the stack, this is across verticals. So for example, recently there was we have a partnership with Rigetti where they are exploring it for financial applications, just because, again, it's not life sciences. So we already see how some parts, some products of the, or some parts of the product can be used for different verticals. But also what has happened is that while doing research on the life sciences and chemistry, we realized that some of the algorithms actually really that we have developed and then patented or filed for patent are really useful for different things. And so we are now opening up two different, let's say, directions. One is more related to optimization, and the other one is more related to Gen AI and AI. So, but these are, it's interesting because they don't come from an initial decision, okay, we will be doing everything. They come from the other side. We are doing what we are focusing initially, although we have, of course, the infrastructure software, which in any case we need to have for anything. And then we realize, wait a second, this algorithm, this method actually is super important also for these other things. And then we start growing in that direction. This type of approaching, for me, makes much more sense than starting a startup. Okay, but this is only my opinion. There can be other ways that basically directly tackle very many different verticals, just because if you want to really operate at scale and do very complex demonstrations, and you need to do them because otherwise you don't learn what are the difficulties, then it's much harder, because I mean each of these different verticals have different categories of algorithms, like quantum simulations versus optimization algorithms versus machine learning. They have very different methodologies. They are not the same. So only the other way around, to me, makes, at least for us, makes more sense, because it comes from a realization, okay, we can apply now this to this other
Right.
type of.
So is it fair to say you sort of tackle a problem, let's say chemistry simulation, and in order to solve that problem, you had to come up with strategies for dealing with the non-Markovian open quantum systems kind of aspect of the hardware that you're dealing with. And then those tools that you build for that solution, you can apply to other solutions that's sort of naturally adjacent, because the need for dealing with the noise, dealing with the shortcomings of the hardware is very similar. And there are things like state preparation and sampling, et cetera. There are commonalities across even very different algorithms at the top, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. This is what has happened. And also, I mean, there is also always some sort of if you want, some unpredictability, right? Because this is a field which is just evolving. So at some
Very
point, you
quickly.
just realize that, wait a second, then this is something we can absolutely do, and we can do better than many other methods or many other ways. So there, you keep being open without obviously losing a focus. You need to have some focus, but you keep being open to the field, how it evolves, how things change quickly, how unpredictable results or direction can come up. And of course, that is, and clearly we also guided by the type of clients that we have and by their needs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've used this example before, this analogy before, but I just find it so compelling. What you're describing sounds to me like a version of, Stan Ulam at Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies, working with von Neumann on that system, was trying to come up with a method to use that system for neutron diffusion calculations, and came up with the Monte Carlo algorithm. And it wasn't until 30 years later that somebody looked at the Monte Carlo and thought, maybe I can optimize this portfolio with this.
Yeah.
And it was a combination of not having the hardware capacity at the time in the late 40s, early 50s to do something of that scale, but also just sort of an imagination, like to see it through that lens in a very open-ended. And it feels like what you're trying to do in Algorithmiq is sort of tighten that loop, is discover those techniques that can get results and then deliver those to demands in the market or open questions in the market.
Absolutely. And it's true that, of course, the tradition comes from life sciences and chemistry simulations, because we have very, very, very strong team. And obviously, winning Q4Bio, I mean, with the competitors that we had, like all the major incredible startups and universities, it was incredible. It's external validation which tells that we are leading in this field. But at the same time, it's a very good example, the one you gave. But think also about NVIDIA, for example, that started as really developing, the GPUs for video games and graphic cards, and then suddenly, users realize, oh, that's perfect actually for AI and for machine learning. So it's the user is by using a device that you understand and developing methods for this, that you understand actually what could be the potential new users, and you explore them, and then you can find actually something that is even more disruptive than your original application.
Right.
So, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I'll say again that seems to be, you're uniquely qualified for that challenge, because it's balancing that sort of curiosity-driven scientific exploration with finding market opportunities and directing that energy into addressing the market. So, if you, it's difficult because of the rate of innovation and as you said, the variability of the landscape of the quantum technologies. What do you sort of see as the next major milestones for Algorithmiq if you look a year or two ahead?
Yes, so we have actually a series of milestones. One of them is, of course, related to the applications now of the framework that we have developed for healthcare and life sciences to different types of problems. We are continuing, of course, the photodynamic therapy for cancer treatment. There is a lot to be done, but we started already now with precisely the same pipeline, because it is transferable, to apply these to antimicrobial resistance problems. And this is super interesting, super important, another of the sustainability development challenges. So it's a very important aspect. And then we are applying the simulation pipeline to study metabolism or problems related to pineapple. So again, we are perfectioning and applying to different potentially really groundbreaking problems together with clients of relevance and end users of in healthcare life sciences. But then at the same time, clearly, our major goal following this fundraising is in increasing the business, commercial and marketing operations. So this is where we are growing. We started to grow. We already started to hire because it makes sense now, because the market is really becoming more and more mature. So that's exactly what needs to be done, and the timing is right, and it's excellent because we just closed the new round, so it makes a lot of sense. So, and finally, the other important goal is instead more related to if you want really optimizing some of these more fundamental type of methodologies, the digital quantum interface, to different hardware providers, because we not only initially we worked a lot with IBM, we keep working there, some our very important partners, but for example now we have also collaborations with Microsoft that is more related to the neutral atom, so to Magne, and new quantum computers that is being deployed at the Novo Nordisk Foundation. And there is a number of methodologies that are really optimal for neutral atoms. So then we are starting collaborations with with trapped ions startups, and again, so demonstrating and optimizing the algorithms in order to guarantee that they are hardware agnostic is really important. And this is something which, again, is more at the level of the I would say really software infrastructure, the digital quantum interface, methods like measurements methods and so on and so forth, and they can be applied to different verticals. And so this is what we are doing at the same time. And clearly there are metrics that are related to revenue, to adoption, and so on and so forth, as all startups. But let's say the most important directions are these three that I just mentioned.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and it's what I think is really exciting is, as you said very early on, that the method that you developed for the Q4Bio challenge will improve verifiably improve as the hardware improves. And we're exactly on this path now to, probably by 2030, there'll be a system that is fault tolerant at a scale that is not simulatable anymore. And, somebody working with you now can expect the algorithms and the pipelines and the frameworks that you're developing to just get better and better and better and start to deliver value that's just not realizable by any other means because we've passed that simulation threshold.
That's exactly the case. And it's important when you have clients to start delivering value now, but then link the methodologies, the algorithms to the progress of the quantum computer so that they see where the truly disruptive part is. But again, some parts of for example, we have with the Professor Sherry McFarland, that is the inventor of this photosensitizer, we have also, she's a lab where she synthesizes new molecules. And what we are doing is that we have an active learning pipeline that already now is able to generate variants of these molecules that are new, novel. So it's really ab initio with a quantum computer would be an ab initio input of active learning pipelines that generate new molecules and can then be tested in the lab of Professor McFarland. So we have already 3 new candidates that she will be synthesizing. So this type of, if you want, methodologies where we already use something with what we have now and we adapt it perfectionist as the devices improve are key to build and to create industrial value.
That's fantastic. Well, Sabrina, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I've always been impressed with what you've been doing with Algorithmiq, and I continue to be. I look forward to the future, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. Bye.
My thanks again to Sabrina Maniscalco for a genuinely substantive conversation. The bit that I keep coming back to is her insistence that the Q4Bio molecule is not hydrogen, meaning it's not a single proton and a single electron. This is a real drug in phase 2 clinical trials being simulated on real hardware with a method that has a built-in benchmark against the best classical technique. That's a very different posture from a lot of what we hear in the quantum advantage debate, and it's the kind of specificity worth paying attention to. You'll find full show notes for this episode at newquantumera.com, including links to Algorithmiq's Q4Bio announcement, the quantum advantage tracker that Algorithmiq and IBM put forward to the community, Sabrina's earlier work on open quantum systems, and a few NQE-related episodes, including my conversation with her co-founder Guillermo Garcia Perez on informationally complete measurements, and Garnet Chan's more skeptical view on quantum chemistry's classical limits. Together, they make a good triangulation. This episode was brought to you by Outshift, Cisco's incubation engine. Computational demand is outpacing what classical systems can deliver in drug discovery, materials, finance, everywhere. Outshift's bet is that the answer isn't a single quantum machine, but a scalable quantum network, distributed devices connected through open standards and a vendor-agnostic architecture, working as one resource. Learn more about the Cisco Universal Quantum Switch at outshift.com. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe wherever you listen and share it with someone who's still trying to figure out what quantum software companies actually do. Word of mouth is genuinely how this show finds the right listeners. Thanks for listening. I'm Sebastian Hassinger, and this has been The New Quantum Era. Theme music by OCH. See you next time.